In this video, I'm going to be sewing a 3.0 millimeter pearl garland and a 2.4 millimeter rhinestone chain using the 2 feet that came in this set. This one is called the round bead foot, and it said that it's good for up to 4 millimeters. You'll see the groove on the bottom to accommodate the beads. This one the book calls a sewing beads pressure foot. It does not specify the size bead, but you can see that it's slightly smaller. When sewing beads, it's best to choose the bead size that fits through this with the least amount of wobble, but not one that's really tight. As you can see, there's a lot of play in this because these are 3 millimeters. So when you're doing that, as always, I use what I have. This is what I have, so this is what I will show. You just have to go a little slower because the beads will wobble back and forth a little bit since they're not quite as snug. But I will be showing you how to do both of these. As always, use a fabric that's similar to your fashion fabric to set up and make adjustments to get the look that you want before starting your project, to set your stitch length, your stitch width, the tension, and all of that. If your fabric is a stiffer fabric, interfacing for support shouldn't be necessary, but using it is an option. I would recommend using a wash away or tear away interface behind thinner fabrics when sewing on beads and pearls. This isn't necessary, but it may take a lot longer for you to set up your thread tension to get it correct. The only cameras I have are my current and old phone. They have limited zoom and quality, so many times I'm not able to set up the shot that I would like, and many times it makes it difficult to sew without bumping the camera or dropping something. Oops. Life is hectic, so I don't upload on a regular basis, so please hit the bell to be notified when I do. In this first example, I'm going to use the foot with the smallest groove. I'm using a color matching thread in the bobbin and a clear monofilament in the top needle. I have set my machine to zigzag. This is a 3.0 millimeter bead, so my width is 3.5 and my length is 3.0 as I'm sewing. You can see that there's a lot of playroom right there. Oops, and that happens. So let's get that back in there. Not easy working around a camera. Okay, the first ones I'm going to put down manually just to kind of lock the beads into place. And then I'm going to start stitching. On your practice pieces, if you notice that the fabric will pucker just a little bit, I put just a little bit of pressure, not a lot, but just a little bit of pressure on the fabric to kind of stretch it just a tiny bit so that the end product is not puckered. So now I'm going to start sewing. Zoom out Looks a little bit better. And then that's what it looks like. Okay, I'm gonna have to get a better close-up of that outside of this. On this next example, I'm going to use the one with the wider groove. Earlier I stated that this was the smaller groove hole, but I was actually wrong. This one has a larger groove on it. This is not specified in the book as to the width. So I'm going to use this one. It just snaps on. It's not easy seeing that clear thread with the camera in my way. There we go. And start the same way. Just select where you want your beads to start. I'm going to use 2 strands. Getting both of these strands in here takes a little bit of play, but they will eventually fit. Now I'm going to make my stitch width up to 6.0. And then drop it manually the first couple of stitches. Oops, sorry. And then start stitching slowly. I'm not going very far because these are just sample pieces. On this sample, I'm going to leave the foot set up the same way as the last sample, but instead of 2 rows of beads, I'm going to use 1 row of beads and 2 strings. Now, because of the width of this will be crimped some. So this will depend on how wide this groove is. Again, the first few is very slow, manually dropped. Oops, I guess you couldn't see my hand was in the way. For this example, I'm using the one with the smaller groove. I've also increased my tension slightly, and I've taken my zigzag stitch back to a length of 3.0 and a width of 3.5. If the beads don't fit under it, lift your pressure foot a little bit and you should have adequate room depending on the size of your beads. And trying to keep my hands out of the camera room. First few manually to help lock it in. Keep my hands out of the way. The flare on these grooves help you guide around curves very easily. The biggest thing about doing curves is being sure to get a bead size that properly fits into these grooves with as little play as possible. You want a bead that will pass easily but won't have play. Having beads with a lot of play in them doesn't make it impossible to use these feet, just a little more challenging. To make the curves, I'm focusing on the needle drop, the placement of the bead string, the path I'm following, the tension of the fabric and the bead string, and moving the fabric all at the same time. Go slow and practice, practice, practice. You will eventually start to feel the flow. Now for the close-ups. Here's what it looks on the edge. You can see the monofilament a little bit, but it's not bad. This camera. There it goes. That's the straight line, single. Here's the double one. I think that's kind of cool, especially if you did like that on curves. That'd be really neat. This one, I think the groove was a little too tight to do a double thread. I actually raised it up, but it could be an interesting texture piece. And then this is the curve. It's still not attached, but it came out well. It came out pretty well also. When sewing on smooth beads, using a colored thread should work just fine. But when sewing rhinestones, thread will hang on all these little prongs. So I would recommend using either a clear or smoky monofilament instead. I don't really want to cut this since this is just for an sample, so I'm going to come all the way down here so I still have a lot of play in it to show more. Lift the foot high, get it up under there. And again, you're going to set your length and your width. This is, I think I said 2.4 millimeters. So my length, I'm taking to 2.5, and my width, I'm going to take to 3.0. Because these aren't as smooth and it could catch, I want to be sure that it's a little bit wider. And there's a lot of play. Once I got it started. Now with my machine, each machine might have their own characteristics, so learn your machine. Mine has a tendency to sew a little bit to the left instead of more to the center. My poor machine has gone through a lot on the job site, so it's not exactly like new anymore. So I'm going to keep this to the left just a little bit as I slowly start to sew. Another thing that you can do is I'm going to change this to the wider foot, and I'm going to do 2 rows at once. Okay, since I don't want to cut this, I'm just going to make a loop in it. Make it go out the back a little ways. Very squirrely. Okay, I have changed my width setting to a 6.0 wide. I want to test that just to be sure. That looks good. So now hold these down. Okay, and slowly start stitching. Okay, now I'm going to add this cord, this little piece that's in between that. Test your width. I'm actually going to change my width just a little and then test it. Okay. And keeping it flat and sewing slowly. You can also do curves. Okay. Okay, and this is the finished rhinestones. If we'll zoom, there we go. Nice and straight. This is the one with the cord beside it. We also took into a little curve down here. And then the double one. Kind of like the double one on this one too.